There's a lot of vacation drama, a lot of stress. We had points where my wife and I's marriage is not perfect. There are points where we argued and fought. There are moments where, like I just said, where we cried and shared. In a different season of our marriage, this last month would have completely hijacked my sabbatical and would have been replete with tension and anxiety in our home, and we would have gone to our separate corners to figure out how to be vulnerable. But we didn't. We're in a season of marriage where we got to be vulnerable together, where we're able to work through our arguments, and where we're able to mitigate the havoc that Satan would like to have on our home and our marriage. And I would like some semblance of that for all of you. I'm going to embarrass my wife for a minute now. At 43 years old, this is my favorite season of marriage. My wife walks into a room and I just smile. And she says, "What are you looking at?" "Just you." That's the season of marriage that I'm in. But that season of marriage came through a lot of hard work, pain, and drama. And so the text that I'm going to use to anchor us through this series is Ephesians chapter 5, beginning in verse 25. I'd like to read it to you now. Now listen to me, husbands. Come on, take a breath and listen to the text. Love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Selah. That he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the word, so that he could present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. That's your ambition, gentlemen. In the same way, husbands, you should love your wives as your own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we're members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one soul, one flesh. The mystery's profound. It's saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. This is a series about broken promises, unkept vows, unmet expectations. We all have them. We all understand what that feels like. And so we are going to return to the vows of our wedding day through the course of this series and examine them carefully and see what we might learn from them. And what I bet you don't know is our traditional vows, the ones that most of us have said on our wedding day, actually come from this text. I've got good news for you. In just a few short months, the presidential campaign season for the next president of the United States will begin. Everybody excited? Yeah, woo, yeah. We are so used to, they're going to tell us stuff that they're not actually going to do. But we're so conditioned to broken vows that we'll advocate and settle for the lie. Hey, guess what my candidate lied about me today? We should vote for him because he says he's going to do this thing that he's not going to do, but at least it'll get him elected. Oh yeah, well my candidate lied about these things that they're definitely not going to do, but we should vote for them. That's what we've turned this circus into. So we become okay with it in campaigns. We've become okay with it with academic promises. Like me, some of you are very close to sending your kids away to school somewhere, somehow, and there's a part of you that's holding out promise. That college is going to make promises that it cannot deliver on. It's not going to be able to deliver on it for your kids. Maybe you're used to career letdowns and those promises being broken. My guess is that some of you at some point have been like, you know what, this place has not lived up to what they said it was going to be like. I'm out. And I know that's true because we have gone from pensions and retirement plans with companies to the average tenure being less than 3 years with one company. Because we put our heart and soul into the promise, and when it doesn't live up to it, we go find a better one. We're used to it in relationships. We're used to broken promises, unmet expectations with our friends who weren't there for us, with our family who have betrayed us, and with our pastors, friends, and churches. We become accustomed to just living with broken vows. But it feels particularly offensive to us when it happens in our marriages, doesn't it? It feels particularly visceral to us when it happens with our betrothed, doesn't it? Because, after all, these other areas of our life don't start out with the promise, till death do us part, right? Most of these relationships don't even start out with vows. Nobody starts a friendship with vows. Bro, I totally promise to bro with you all the bro days of your life. As long as this bromance should live, I will be your bro. I'm just quoting Lance Carnan right now, so everybody's like, yeah, that's totally Lance. That was a good imitation, bro. All right, listen. Here are the classic vows based on Ephesians 5. I take you to be my wife or husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, so long as we both shall live, or till death do us part. Now, I in spite of every conceivable variation of a wedding vow, and I've read a ton of them, they all mostly lead back to the same idea, to this idea. When loving each other is hard, I will persist in these vows as an anchor for our marriage, because marriage is not a contract. I tried to find it, but I've never seen a wedding on YouTube or in person where the vows that are read are the prenup agreement. No, because even if you think a prenup agreement is an appropriate way to begin a marriage, the ceremony is more hopeful than that for us, isn't it? And so we make these vows. Marriage is not a contract. Now, if you've ever seen me do a wedding here at Anthem, some of this is going to be a little bit of review, but it's an important review, and that is this, that marriage is not a contract. You understand that? And by contract, what I mean is that it needs reciprocation. Under a contract view of marriage, love needs refueling. This is why we have language like, I have fallen out of love with you. It's because what we're expressing in that moment is that the requisite fuel source for sustaining my affection towards you has dried up. Under a contract view, we need reciprocation. Under a contract view, love needs refueling. And so therefore the love, the covenant, or the contract in this case, is conditional on you filling my fuel source as reciprocity for my vow keeping. The covenant view of marriage doesn't need reciprocation. It's about adoration, meaning when our worship is rightly directed, in this case, the Bible says to Jesus Christ, then it no longer becomes about needing my love refueled. My love is now a reflection. It is a love that flows through me but doesn't come from me anymore. And so whether or not you hold up your end of the deal, I'm still able to love you through a hard season until the affection is restored. That's the covenantal view of marriage. It's the only view. It's the correct view. It is the view of marriage, that my vows are unconditional. In fact, Galatians 3 says this. To give a human example, brothers, even with a man-made covenant, no one annuls it or adds to it once it has been ratified. The point that Paul is trying to make with that verse is this, it's harder to get out of a loan or a mortgage in America than it is to get out of a marriage. We take every contract and vow we make seriously, except the one that is foundational to any healthy community. Just try not paying your mortgage. Let me know how that goes. But I can be done with my wife tomorrow with just a stroke of the pen. Now, maybe here's what you're saying to me this morning as we're getting into this. Alan, I feel like my marriage is okay. I don't feel like there's any crisis, any problems. Nothing seems to be particular. I mean, marriage is hard, but I think we're okay. So my job over the next 4 weeks is to stir some stuff up, okay? Why? Because I'm sadistic and I like seeing everybody freak out? Yes. No, that's not true. It's because we want marital flourishing, not marital resignation. So, we're going to take a little bit of a health check. If you're using the Anthem app, you actually will have this in the notes section there where you can just write this down. But I really do encourage you, if you have something with you, to write this down, because this little marriage health check, I think, will be helpful. Because some of you are saying, confessionally, I believe in the covenantal view of marriage, not the contract one. But functionally, because you're not paying attention to your vows, your marriage is behaving like it's under contract, not covenant. You follow me so far? So, what I did is I went through the Bible and I said, what are some of the hallmarks of God's covenant with us through Jesus Christ? And can I use those as kind of a health check for your relationship? So, hopefully my wife isn't taking notes too furiously back there. So I'm going to put up this chart, okay? All right. There is the covenantal view, and there is the contractual view. So first, ask yourself this question. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 15 says this. Do we have that? Yes. Therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since at death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions that they committed. So either your marriage is functioning redemptively, go back to the chart, or resentful. Do you see seasons as transformational or transitional? Do you see hard seasons in your marriage as something to get through or to receive transformation from the Lord? Everything that has ever happened in your marriage that's hard, everything that is happening in your marriage that's hard, can be redemptive for the Christian. In fact, all painful seasons must be redemptive for the Christian. If you just see it as transitional, meaning we just got to get through this season, we just got to get through this hard part, we just got to get through this rut, it's not going to work. Because you all know what the Bible knows, which is that hard seasons linger with us. They either change us in making us more resentful, even if it's just incrementally, or those hard seasons become something redemptive because you went through it with somebody in oneness. Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 34 says this, "Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah." Verse 32, "Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord." That's enough for now. Either your marriage is functioning covenantally in a considerate way, or it's functioning contractually in a conceited way. And this is going to affect the way that you guys argue. Do you require reciprocity to honor your vows? Well, ask it this way. Do you catch yourself in your head saying things like this? Well, if they're not, then I'm not. Well, they're not, so I'm not. They didn't, so I'm not going. That's you saying, I'm not going to honor my vows unless I see reciprocity. A guy named Dr. Eggerichs wrote this about trying to make a marriage work that way. Look at this chart here. He said that there are 3 cycles of marriage, and the one where you say, I'm not going to honor my vows unless they honor their vows, he calls that the crazy cycle. He says there's only one way out of the crazy cycle of marriage. Somebody has to choose to honor their vows first. Because when you start to honor your vows, it energizes them to honor theirs. And when 2 people begin honoring their vows, you enter a cycle where now you're giving lots of grace, irrespective of what they do. So is your marriage considerate or conceited? It's about me, about reciprocity, about what I need, or is it about them and the vows that you have made to them? Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3 says this. "Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred, your father's house, to the land that I will show you." We're all familiar with this. We've been in Genesis. Look at the next verse. "And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing." Back to the chart. Is your marriage a blessing or a burden? Well, how do I know? Because this is about your joy. Well, if you catch yourself saying this a lot, well, marriage is just hard. Not all the time. Well, you're not married to this person. Marriage is not supposed to be hard all the time. Well, they're just hard to love. That's so romantic. That's the romance is well and alive. Or how about this? Here's the Christian version. Which I don't agree with. Marriage is meant to make you holy, not happy. That is depressing. That is depressing Christian language, okay? and I understand what they're trying to say by that, but here's what I would like. I would like to add an addendum to that, okay? Because the person who wrote that was trying to say this: marriage is not primarily about your circumstances, but about how marriage changes you into the metaphor that it's called to be. The thing is, though, when you are transformed, it produces joy. So your marriage is designed for your joy. And so marriage is just a burden. You're thinking contractually, not covenantally. Romans chapter 11, verse 27 says this: it says nothing. It's an empty verse. No. And this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. So covenant takes away sins. So let me ask you a question. Is your marriage forgiving or forgoing? Ask yourself this: are there past hurts that are you either repressing or confessing your past hurts? The Bible says, are you keeping score? Are you keeping a record of wrongs that they are only going to come out later when you argue? Are you in a posture of forgiving the pain that they cause you? Or do you find yourself more often than not just ignoring the problems, forgoing them till a later date that never happens? Forgiving or forgoing? Hebrews 8 verse 10 says this: for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. Again, we're talking about covenant. I will put my laws in their minds. I will write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Do you see how the priority that he places on his relationship with you? So let me ask you again. Is your marriage covenantal? Is it a priority? Or is it contractual? Is it peripheral? Is spending time together in this season rare? Are you saying things to yourself like, I just got to focus on my career right now, my work? We need to just focus on the kids and raise them and get them through college, and then we'll have time for each other. It's not going to work. Is your marriage the priority, or is something else your priority? Psalm 105 verse 8 says this: he remembers his covenant forever, the word that he commanded for 1,000 generations. That's good news, church, but it does ask this question: are you faithful or fickle in your vow keeping? As we come to the end of this list, if you have used language like, I don't know if our marriage would make it, or I'm not sure how much longer I can do this, or I can't live like this anymore. If you use distance, time, or quantity to measure your marriage negatively, I'm here to tell you that that is part of the problem. Because what you are expressing in statements like that is that your marriage is conditional, requires reciprocity, is not being fueled. You may confessionally believe in covenantal marriage, but you are functionally living out a contract with your spouse. And the reason this is a problem is because we have verses like Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 5. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. God doesn't want to hear you say, well, I married the wrong person. He'd rather you just not get married than make a vow, because he cares a lot about his image bearers keeping their word. When something happens, when you're hurt, when you're let down, when you're disappointed by the person that you love, the health of your marriage hangs in the balance depending on whether you slip into contractual thinking or you remember your vows. Covenantal. Whether you see the season as redemptive or resentful. Whether their actions make you considerate or conceited. Whether you settle for burden or blessing. Whether the pain they caused you makes you pursue forgiveness or foregoing. Whether you make your marriage a priority or you put it in the peripheral. Whether you're faithful to your vows or fickle with them. Because God cares about your vows, even if you don't. Don't believe me? James 12, above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or earth in your wedding day you swore something, or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no. Why? Because when we break vows, we fall under his condemnation. Numbers 30, if a man vows to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. That is a command. Psalm 89:34, I will not violate my covenant or alter the word that went forth from my lips. That's how God treats his vow to you. Remembering your vows coincides with image bearing, church. And image bearing is where all joy and flourishing comes from. Genesis says, I will remember my covenant that is between you and me and every living creature of all flesh, till death do us part. Death is the only thing that severs the marriage covenant. Why? Because at death, you won't need that metaphor anymore. There will be a perfect groom and a perfect bride, and that metaphor is no longer necessary for us to understand how much he loves us and what his vow to the church is like. So we're just going to look at verse 32 for a few minutes, and that'll be the start of this series. So there are three very short points on verse 32. The mystery of marriage, the groom of marriage, and the bride of marriage. Look at the first part of verse 32, which says this. This mystery, meaning that a man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That mystery is profound. I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. That's verse 32, okay? So here's the history of the mystery. If you're not a Christian, and I know there's a couple of you out here, why do you even care about marriage? Have you ever, I've been to a few in the last few years where I've been to a Christian wedding and I've been to a non-Christian wedding, and they are radically different. Because in a non-Christian marriage, wedding, they don't know what to do with the vows. And so what they do is they end up quoting a poet or some sort of something from, literature. But what you'll find in common about all non-Christian vows is this. They're self-centered. They're completely contingent on me. In other words, marriage is a mystery to the culture. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to make vows. They don't know how to come together. I mean, why put yourself in a legal arrangement with significant consequences if what you actually believe in your worldview is that this is not till death do us part? Why would you do that? What's the point? But if you go to a Christian wedding, oh, there is something so beautiful about that, because the vows roll past the groom and the bride that's in front of you, and they roll up to the groom and the bride that presides in heaven. They're not self-centered. They're gospel-centered. They're Jesus-centered. They're covenant-centered. That I can't do this, but He can. He is the thing that anchors me to you, not my own efforts. I said this to a young married couple once. I said this to a young woman once. I said, my hope for you is that you actually marry a Christian man. Do you know why? And she says to me, why? And I says, because he will go through seasons where he doesn't feel like he loves you. What anchors him to the marriage at that moment? For a Christian man, and don't get me wrong, Christians have made a mess of marriage, but the way that it's supposed to be, the way that it is intended to be, is that the covenant that God has made with you through Jesus Christ anchors you to the covenant you make with your own bride, to your own groom. And what Paul is saying here about this was a mystery is like Jews knew that marriage was good, but they didn't have the full picture of its purpose in God's redemptive plan. And so for a Jew, marriage was very, very role-driven. A typical Jew man would come home from work and he would go up to the roof, which was essentially his man cave, and he would relegate all of the household duties to his wife, and he was not involved in heart or intimate stuff, not typically. It was driven by roles. And in case you think the culture got it better, the Greeks basically were utilitarian. There's one quote from an old Greek writer who said this: we have courtesans for sex, we have concubines for cohabitation, and we have wives to bear us children. Romans might have been worst of all. Their view on marriage was essentially legalized prostitution. A typical Roman woman did not want to have kids because they would be scared to death of what it would do to their bodies, because in Rome, once they had exhausted you, they moved on to the next. In fact, there's one historical account of a woman having 23 husbands. But for the Christian, it's not utilitarian. It's not legalized prostitution. It's not role-driven. It's metaphor-driven. It is about a relationship with Jesus. It is not a mystery to us, is what Paul is saying. The culture's way of solving this mystery is to treat marriage as a contract. They expect vows to be poetic and not to be literal. The Bible's way, juxtaposed against this, is that your marriage either testifies or it falsifies. It either tells the truth about who Jesus is or it lies about who Jesus is. So when you went through that health check, what areas of your relationship is it falsifying about what Jesus is like? And pay attention to it in this season. The rest of verse 32 goes like this. It refers to Christ in the church. I'm going to read verse 33. It may not be on the screen. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself. That's you, husbands. And let the wife see that respects her husband. So we talked about the mystery of marriage. Let's talk about the groom of the marriage really quick. Men, what we're going to do in this series is we're going to repeat two things over and over again. For you in marriage, the way that you live up to the metaphor of Jesus and the church is if you did two things, you would be well on your way. Number one, take initiative like Jesus. And number two, take responsibility like Jesus. By initiative, I mean pursuit. Philippians 2 says that he was in the form of God, and then he emptied himself, taking on the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. He pursued us from heaven. So men, this series is going to be about you pursuing your wife, studying your wife, dating your wife, engaging with your wife, and then secondarily pursuing Jesus, studying Jesus, praying with Jesus, going to church, reading your Bible, all the instruments of grace intended not only for your own flourishing, but the flourishing of your marriage. Initiative means going first, gentlemen. Get out of the game room, turn off Netflix, and take her out for dinner. Romans 5:8 says, God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Meaning he took initiative without the expectation of reciprocity necessarily. Take initiative with intimacy. I don't mean sex. Right? I say take initiative with intimacy, and 10 men in their heads went, all right, all right, all right. See? No, that's not what I'm talking about. Take initiative with time. And if you were like, uh-oh, to any of those things on the screen earlier, take initiative with change. You initiate. You lift that burden. Take initiative like Jesus and take responsibility like Jesus. First, responsibility for others. Do they have what they need? Are they flourishing? Another way that you can take responsibility is you can ask this question, no matter how mad your wife gets at you, gentlemen, how have I contributed to this? That's what it means to take responsibility in a marriage. And responsibility for yourself. When responsibility and initiative intersect together, we get repentance. When was the last time, gentlemen, your wife heard you say, I'm wrong? Not told you were wrong. You're like, that happens a lot, actually. Yeah, I know. But when was the last time you, without her having to, that you walked, I hurt you, my bad. Shot her a text. Hey, I'm sorry for my tone when I walked out the door. Called her on the phone. Hey, that's not how I, when was the last time you initiated in taking responsibility for yourself in this marriage, in this relationship? As for the bride of marriage, ladies, there are two things that I'm going to try and get across over and over to you. Number one, your husband is a metaphor, not a savior. Your husband is a metaphor, not a savior. He is not actually Jesus. He's just supposed to imitate Jesus. And so if you hold him in such high regard that you expect him to actually be Jesus, you're going to end up crucifying him like Jesus. You feel me? And I know a lot of you like to use really sharp knives or knitting needles, whichever you choose. He cannot save your marriage. Only Jesus can. He cannot change your heart. Only Jesus can. He cannot transform your thinking. Only Jesus can. And so, ladies, if you are not pursuing Jesus with fervency, then you will expect him to be more than a metaphor. And then your marriage is going to suffer. So number one, he is a metaphor, not a savior. And number two, he is your groom, but he is not your boss. Now, I'm going to get into this more later in the series, but nowhere in the Bible does it describe the relationship akin to an employee or an employer. He is not the boss of you. But I will say this, ladies. The Journal of American Psychiatric Medicine in 2019 wrote this. that 60% of women in a relationship that they self-described as equitable are still discontent or unhappy with their marriage. So equity in and of itself is not going to solve your marriage problems. Him living out the metaphor and you living out the metaphor is what brings about marriage health. So, I'm going to give you ladies permission to do something. You need to confront your husbands when they're not like Jesus. Lovingly, respectfully, but you're not supposed to just eat that stuff in a marriage. You're not supposed to just eat that stuff. For those of you that are dating, you need to be calling out all that stuff right now, because it's not like it's just going to go away and marriage is going to solve it. Get some help, be in community, sort it out now. So, you guys can come up. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do over the next 3 more weeks that we have. For some of you in your relationships, and even in the ones that you think are healthy, you need to change the narrative. And you can start right now in this moment. When the music starts and you bow your heads and you get ready for communion, you can grab her hand and you can start right now asking the Lord to help you change the narrative. Because even if you are a confessional, covenantal marriage Christian, some of you are functionally acting contractually. So ask him to help change the narrative. Stop asking questions like, is my marriage working? There is a subtle message behind that. Start asking, how's the metaphor going? That is such a better question, because it's not concerned with pass or fail. It's concerned about Jesus working in you and through you in relationship to one another. Change the narrative. And number 2, start remembering your vows again. If you're dating, look forward to them. If you're married, look back to them. God made a vow beginning with Adam, to Noah, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, on and on and on. Hebrews 9. He is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. And since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under that first covenant. God believed in his vow and his covenant so much that he died for it. He did so in the person and work of Jesus Christ on an old rugged cross to bring his bride home. What if you thought about the gospel more like this when you think about your marriage? There's a story of a groom. Looking for his bride. One day he sets out on a mission to bring his bride home. And so he leaves all the garnishment of royalty and pomp and circumstance that heaven and eternity could afford, and he goes looking for her in a shady neighborhood. And he pursues her. He protects her. And he lays down his life for her. One day, he says, I will come back and I will carry you home. But until then, remember what I did for you. Live that out amongst each other. He died to keep his vow. He never annulled it. He never changed it or broke it. And in spite of our continued lack of reciprocity throughout all of history, He sealed it in His own blood. Anthem Church, will you be an image bearer in your marriages? Will you remember your vows? Yeah, but Alan, you don't know how hard it is. You don't know what they're like. Don't trust the season. I'm going to ask you to not trust the pain or even them in some manner of speaking. Trust Him, the vow keeper, the covenant maker, the God who cares about His vows so that you should care about yours. If you're sitting with your spouse this morning, or the person that you are dating, I'm going to invite you to take their hand. And listen, if you're dating, you can say, listen, I'm going to try and live up to this. You're not getting married right now, okay? I'm going to read the vows, right? I'm not going to read this and be like, ha, you're married. Okay, that's not what's going to happen. Even though I could do that. That would be epic. I'm going to ask you to live up to them. As you date, to aspire to them. And for those of you that are married, to remember them, to reaffirm them over these next lifetime, but especially these next 4 weeks. So take their hand and listen to this. I take you to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, for long as we both shall live, till death do us part. These are not just your vows to one another, but this is the gospel.